Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to Menschel Hall. I'm Martha Tedeschi, the Elizabeth and John Moores Cabot Director of the Harvard Art Museums. I'm delighted that you could join us for tonight's lecture by Patricia Marroquin Norby entitled Foregrounding Indigenous Voices and Perspectives at the Met. As is our practice, we initiate this gathering with a formal land acknowledgement. Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Tonight's program is supported by the Ellen Wayles Randolph Coolidge Fund for American Art. I'd like to tell you a little bit about this newly endowed lecture, which is only in its second year. The fund was established by Dr. Catherine Kitty Lastavica in 2019. It honors Ellen Wayles Randolph Coolidge, Thomas Jefferson's eldest granddaughter, and pays tribute to her capacious intellect, decades-long relationship to Boston and the North Shore, and her transatlantic connections with people, places, and works of art across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The Lastavica Endowment ensures a dynamic and rigorous program of research, exhibitions, lectures, and publications related to our collections of American painting, sculpture, and decorative arts from the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries. This Coolidge Fund is the first fund established at the Harvard Art Museums named solely in honor of a woman. To this end, Horace Ballard, the Theodore E. Stebbins Jr. Associate Curator of American Art, has committed the use of this fund going forward to support the work of women artists, curators, scholars, and students who are making significant contributions to the field of hemispheric American art. To date, the fund has been used to support two transformative conversations: the inaugural Coolidge Lecture given in March 2021 by Dr. Kathy Foster, the Robert L. McNeil Jr. Senior Curator of American Art and Director of the American Art Center at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, is here with us this evening. Kathy, wave your hand so everyone can see you. Kathy gave her lecture on Zoom, which was a little disappointing for all of those of us who wanted to have her here. So we invited her back so she could be part of tonight's proceedings. Dr. Foster jump-started our thinking about the American watercolor movement, which included many under-recognized women practitioners, including those represented in our own collections here. More recently, the Coolidge Lecture Fund also made possible a conversation that has launched an ongoing series entitled Beyond the Land Acknowledgement, Native Voices in American Art, with Dr. Jamie Powell, curator at the Hood Museum in Dartmouth, and Dr. Jimena Gomez, assistant curator of UMass Amherst, leading that conversation. Tonight's speaker and her topic will help to build the Harvard Art Museum's awareness and commitment to the continued presence, expertise, and central importance of Indigenous peoples and their traditions. We are grateful to Kitty Lastavica, who unfortunately could not be with us tonight, for her loyal and generous commitment to American art and her vision for this annual lecture. Also, our sincere thanks to Ted Stebbins and Ethan Lasser, who for many years, one succeeding the other, built the collections of American art at Harvard, mentored many students, and cultivated a strong friendship with Kitty Lastavica, leading to this endowed annual lecture. We would also like to thank and welcome our colleagues from the Harvard University Native American program, as well as Associate Provost for Arts and Culture, Lori Gross, and Dean of Arts and Humanities, Robin Kelsey. We are incredibly fortunate to have such collaborators. I want to acknowledge with thanks the hard work of the Harvard Art Museum staff who made tonight's program possible: Erica Lawton, Tiana Fincher, Melanie Sheffield, and Liz Cartland. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Curator Horace Ballard, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. I wish to also express my gratitude to my colleagues Tiana Fincher and Erica Lawton for their expertise and support throughout the planning of tonight's event. I also wish to thank Dr. Kathy Foster, whom it's been an honor to spend time with over this past year, and I am so pleased you accepted the invitation to inaugurate this incredible lecture series and our invitation tonight to come back home. Thank you. Welcome to you all who've gathered with us here in Menchel. Following tonight's talk, Erica and I will circulate with microphones up and down the ancillary stairs on either side. And so please, if you have a question or a comment for Dr. Norby, please just raise your hands. We'll come to find you. And finally, a heartfelt thank you to those who in a future moment, online and across our digital platforms, will listen and watch tonight's talk and join the ensuing conversation. It is my great honor to introduce a dear colleague, Dr. Patricia Marroquin Norby. Dr. Norby is the inaugural Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Prior to her current role, Dr. Norby served as Senior Executive and Assistant Director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian in New York, Director of the Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies at the Newberry in Chicago, and Assistant Professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, where she taught historical and contemporary Native American art histories and culture at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Dr. Norby holds a PhD in American Studies from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, with a specialization in Native American art history and visual culture, as well as an MFA in printmaking and photography from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In addition to numerous articles and essays, Dr. Norby's current project, entitled Water, Bones, and Bombs, examines 20th century Southwest art production and environmental conflict amongst Native, Hispano, and white communities in the northern Rio Grande Valley. I first met Dr. Norby in late 2020, early 2021, when we served with other colleagues in the field on an advisory committee for a grant-making foundation. In fact, we had our first Zoom together on January 6, 2021. And we all remarked what a poignant day it was to be thinking about the current state of museological practice around the visual and material cultures of the Americas on that day. In that conversation, and in every subsequent conversation to follow, Dr. Norby was the most thoughtful, the most insistent, that we clarify both the stakes and the audience for the work that we do, that students were at the center of the work, often the reason for the work, and that there is indeed a difference between inclusion and equity, and that there is always time to express care. At the time of the announcement of her historic hire at the Met, Dr. Norby gave a statement that continues to resonate with me, so I'll not end this on her own words. Quote, "Historical and contemporary Native art embodies and confronts the environmental, religious, and economic disruptions that Indigenous communities have so powerfully negotiated and still negotiate through a balance of beauty, tradition, and innovation. I am deeply honored to join with American Indian and Indigenous artists and communities in advancing our diverse experiences, and I look forward to being part of this critical shift in the presentation of Native American art." Patricia, thank you and welcome.
Recently, I've been giving talks in the past year where I'm wearing headphones or a mask, as well as my glasses, and I feel like I'm about to fly a plane or something, and so this is refreshing. So thank you. Thank you so much, Martha. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Horace, for the invitation. Nadi Hamashak. Hello. I'm Patricia Marroquin Norby, Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And I would like to acknowledge that as a woman of Purépecha descent, I'm a guest here in the ancestral homelands of the Massachusetts and other indigenous peoples, both past and present, who call this place home, and to whom I offer my appreciation and gratitude. I am so honored to be here among such esteemed colleagues, and I would like to thank Horace Ballard, Erica Lawton, Martha, as well as the Harvard Art Museum's team for this opportunity and your hospitality. I know it takes a great deal of effort and coordination to organize an event like this, so thank you. Today I'll share about my curatorial approach, ongoing programmatic changes for Native American art at the Met, as well as current and upcoming exhibitions at the museum, including Art of Native America, the Charles and Valerie Dyker collection, which debuted in 2018 and is now officially a permanent installation in the American Wing, and Water Memories, an exhibition which highlights intimate connections between Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists and water. These important, timely changes both affirm and foreground Indigenous experiences and voices at the Met. They are projects grounded by collaboration and relationship building, both with source communities and individual community members, a practice which has always been a priority in my museum leadership, fine arts scholarship, and now my curatorial practice. In addition to my curatorial responsibilities, I am also the NAGPRA point person for the museum, and I have the honor of working closely with Native nations and Indigenous communities about the appropriate presentation, cultural sensitivities, and eventual repatriation of items currently in our care. In my role at the Met, I also consult cross-departmentally with colleagues who are interested in featuring Native American items in their exhibitions and other programs, and I will be sharing about some of those partnerships as well. My curatorial approach is grounded by my long-term scholarship, which centers on 20th century American and Native American art of the Southwest and its ties to environmental conflicts. My scholarship has involved over a decade of building collaborative relationships with local communities in northern New Mexico, as well as extensive research in American Indian law, New Mexican land grants, legal transcripts, local correspondence, and petitions, to spotlight, for instance, direct connections between the American art icon Georgia O'Keeffe's Abiquiu landscapes and natural resource struggles. I underscore the politics behind modern American art narratives and demonstrate how 20th century American aesthetics elided American Indian and Hispanic voices and perspectives and their contributions to modern American art of that region. I share about my scholarship with you because Indigenous perspectives have greatly impacted my curatorial vision and my commitment to Native American and Indigenous sovereignty, as well as my goals of presenting Native American art and its kinship ties to local environments and Indigenous homelands, values that are reflected in current and ongoing changes at the Met and in the American Wing's new approach to presenting Native American art. In addition to prioritizing Indigenous voices in the American Wing, institution-wide and collaborative efforts are now underway across the museum to appropriately highlight Native American perspectives and art while respecting culturally specific protocols, aesthetic expressions, and sovereignty. Important values that allow for the presentation of Native American art along an aesthetic continuum according to community perspectives while creating a welcoming space for Indigenous visitors. And so what you're looking at right now is the current entrance to Art of Native America, the Charles and Valerie Dyker collection. And currently we have on view two jingle dresses, one contemporary and one historical dress. Both dresses were created by Anishinaabe or Ojibwe women, and that has also been key to my practice to highlight the work of the aesthetic work of Native women. Prior to this installation, for the 2021 entrance, we had the work of two contemporary Native women artists that also created a very warm, vibrant, welcoming space, Jody Archambault and Marie Watt. And part of our goal was to create a space that was warm, welcoming, and vibrant, and uplifting for visitors to come through, to enter the gallery space during the pandemic. Prior to my arrival, the entrance was a little darker, a little more somber. There was a projection of talking heads on a video screen, so it was quite dark when you entered. And then there were some other items that were in the glass cases. During my first installation, I had the lights brought up quite a bit to almost the highest level we could bring them, but also wanted to have things that were energetic and really spoke to the community, that were created by community members, that felt healing and uplifting for visitors when they came into the space. And so that was one reason why we've consistently had dresses that have been danced in the past or in a community environment. My work at the Met began in fall 2020, right during the heart of the pandemic. Some of the efforts I just described were in the very early stages and prompted by the significant gift of 91 items from the Charles and Valerie Dyker collection, a collection which highlights the brilliance of Native American artists from across the United States and Canada. In the permanent installation, Art of Native America, more than 50 Indigenous groups are represented, as well as diverse Native American aesthetic forms, including painting, drawing, sculpture, textiles, quill and beadwork, basketry, and ceramics. So, upon my arrival, I think this is the pointer, this wall, which is just inside the entrance of the gallery, so you can see the two dresses here. And then just as you come into the gallery space, what used to be here was a map delineating all of the spaces on a two-dimensional map on the wall. I'm sure some of you saw this for the original 2018 exhibit. And when I came into the Met, I felt that the map did not accurately express intercultural connections, seasonal movement, migrations, all of these different types of connections between Indigenous communities. Instead, it was very stagnant and it divided the communities from one another. And so I had a number of conversations with Indigenous community members, and they felt the same way. And so I had the map removed and instead created this statement, which is accompanied by a contemporary artwork. So this is the second installation here. This work is created by Peter Jones, and this space will always be reserved for a contemporary artist. And then it'll be in connection with our new land and water statement. Most of the items in the Dyker collection are made to be worn, to nourish, to hunt, defend, protect, and restore balance and wellness. They are from the 18th and 19th centuries. And in my role, I have expanded to include modern and contemporary artworks that demonstrate unbroken aesthetic lineages. Collectively, all of the works on view in the Art of Native America space represent 7 geographical regions: woodlands, Northwest Coast, Arctic Plateau, Plains, Southwest, and California, as well as the Great Basin. This long-term installation provided many gifts as well as challenges, and has helped to broaden the museum's perspective and practices regarding historical, cultural, and aesthetic understandings inspired by the generosity of Native American Indigenous communities and individuals with whom we are now actively collaborating. Our fresh presentations of Native American Indigenous artworks reflect the commitment of the American Wing, which was established in 1924, to foreground Native cultural expressions and perspectives in meaningful and inclusive contexts. And so what you're looking at is our active land and water statement, and I'm just going to read a little bit about it, or read from it to you. We affirm our intentions for ongoing relationships with contemporary Native American and Indigenous artists and the original communities whose ancestral and aesthetic items we care for. We understand that these items, vibrant expressions of Native sovereignty, identity, and connections to community and family, embody intergenerational and environmental knowledge, including origin stories, languages, songs, dances, and ties to homelands. We commit to pursuing continuous collaborations with Indigenous communities and presenting Native American art in a manner that is inclusive of Indigenous perspectives, involves guidance from source communities, and creates space for respectful listening and thoughtful dialogue. We will work to advance Indigenous experiences in the Met's exhibitions, collections, and programs. We will strengthen our awareness of historical and contemporary environmental issues in the New York region and throughout North America in order to thoughtfully reckon with our institutional legacy and its impact on the lands, waters, and original peoples of this place, which are and always will be inextricable. So this statement was installed in April of 2021. And shortly after, the museum installed another land acknowledgement on the facade of the building on 5th Avenue. The museum now has 4 acknowledgements across the museum in different spaces and also at the Met cloisters. I'm well aware that land acknowledgements have meaning for some, and for others, they don't have much meaning unless they are backed up by action. And so it is our daily practice at the museum to back up our statements through action, through collaboration, through partnerships, and we're doing this every day. A recent cross-departmental collaboration in the Met included working with Modern and Contemporary Wing and looking at modern and contemporary artists that should be included in the Art of Native America exhibition. This was relatively new. It's been very exciting, and so we've had the opportunity to bring in more contemporary artists, more contemporary voices in context with the Art of Native America installation. So one artist who we've been working consistently with since 2021 is the Shinnecock artist, Courtney Leonard. And this is her work, Contact 2021. This is a ceramic piece in which she pressed her thumb over 3,500 times into clay, then hand colored as well as hand glazed and fired each of those small shells. These are her interpretation of wampum shells. And then she tied each shell individually to a canvas backing, and it is the same canvas backing that is used for sailboats, shipping vessels, and so there are these ties to Shinnecock history and connections to whaling and whaling ships. This is the reverse of the work. Each shell is tied individually using artificial sinew. The backing itself, or the reverse, is actually quite stunning. And she sent to me so she created this during the pandemic. That's why it's called Contact 2021. And it's part of her response to connection, that loss of connection that we all experienced during the pandemic. She sent photos of herself, but also her family, her husband and her daughter, helping her tie each of the individual shells to the canvas. And so in that way, this is also part of her community, part of her daily life, part of her family practice. The shells all either contain references to historical culture, experiences of her community, pop art. Some are funny, some are sad, other ceramic practices. And here they are in conversation with the 2 jingle dresses. And what I want to point out about these jingle dresses is that this one is contemporary, created by the Anishinaabe artist Shannon Gustafson, and then behind it is this historical work which we borrowed from the Minnesota Historical Society. And what I love about all three of these pieces in conversation together is that they're all created by women. This is the contemporary dress I like to call this the grandmother dress, standing behind her granddaughter, supporting her as she welcomes in the visitors. And then Courtney's piece about land, water, environmental issues, and also community. And so my goal is to create this healing space as people walk into the gallery. The dress is inspired an upcoming program on November 4th, which will feature the premier scholar on jingle dresses and the healing practice of jingle dresses for the Anishinaabe people in dialogue with Robbie Robertson. So both of them will be discussing sound and healing and what it means to them in their scholarly and music, all of these things that are so important to Indigenous art. So I'm really excited about that program. A recent cross-departmental collaboration at the Met involved the inclusion of multiple Indigenous designers in the Costume Institute's 2022 rotation in America, A Lexicon of Fashion. This major exhibition coincided with the Costume Institute's 75th anniversary, as well as the annual Met Gala held on May 1st, 2022, and celebrated the creativity and originality of diverse designers and cultures and their identities expressed in their distinct works. This fashion reappraisal not only presented American fashion as diverse and multifaceted, it was also grounded by unique cultural and emotional resonances and historical narratives represented by crowns of curated vocabulary. So these were 4 of the designers that were selected for the exhibition, and it was really exciting to be able to work with the Costume Institute, to also work with contemporary designers and build that connection between the Costume Institute and the designers. And here are the artists from, let's see, left to right, are Jamie Okuma, Margaret Roach, sorry, Margaret Roach Wheeler, so this is the work by Jamie Okuma, Margaret Roach Wheeler, Frankie Welch, who identifies as Cherokee, and Evan Ducharme. And they represent grace, nurturance, fluency, and self-determination. Additional partnerships involve the Met's American Wing and our Modern and Contemporary Department, including exhibitions and ongoing acquisitions of modern through contemporary Native art. Recently installed in the Modern and Contemporary Wing are 2 paintings by contemporary artist Jean Quick-to-See Smith, enrolled member of the Salish of the Flathead Reservation, and Kay Walking Stick, who is Cherokee. The paintings August Encampment, created in 1988 through 89, using oil on canvas, and Genesis Violent Garden, created in 1981 with acrylic, wax, broken seashells, and metal on canvas, speak to family memories, connections to homelands, Indian politics, and creation stories, as well as settler encroachments, violence, and survival. The current installation of these powerful works by 2 prominent, long-standing leaders of Native American art demonstrate more active, stronger representation of contemporary Native American artists and Native American women at the Met. Working collaboratively, the American Wing and the Modern and Contemporary Department are not only developing programs featuring contemporary Native artists, we're also growing the Met's collection of modern and contemporary Native American art. And recent acquisitions include the work of Truman Lowe, Helen Hardin, Michael Namingha, George Morrison, and Elias Not Afraid. Other exhibitions in the American Wing that involve collaborations with source communities, individual artists, and community members following their lead on how to best foreground Indigenous voices and experiences include Carl Bodmer, North American Portraits, which was on view from April 5th to July 25th, 2021, and was co-curated by Annika Johnson from the Jocelyn Art Museum and Thera Tolles from the Met, and Jules Tavernier in the Elam Pomo, which was on view August 16th through November 28, 2021, curated by Betsy Kornhauser and Shannon Vittoria, also from the Met. Each project included numerous community members as co-curators, advisors, consultants, and contributing authors in order to represent 19th century paintings in context with intergenerational histories, personal lives, and family legacies of contemporary Native American communities who hold direct ties to featured artworks and individuals depicted in the paintings in our collections. And our most recent collaboration right now is Hear Me Now. And I can't say enough good things about this exhibition, and I was honored to be asked to collaborate with my colleagues on this project. And I supported them by introducing them to my friend and colleague, Brooke Bauer, who is a member of the Catawba Nation. She's an amazing scholar. I've known Brooke for many years, first as a graduate student, and then she is part of the audio guide now and also was a contributing author to the catalog. So now I'll talk about my own curatorial work. So I wanted to share all of those collaborative projects with you and just say that that's part of my role at the Met, is collaborating cross-departmentally, advising colleagues on the appropriate presentation of the art, and then I have my own projects that I work on. And so this is my most recent project, Water Memories, which went on view in June of this year. I'm thrilled to share about 2 acquisitions that are currently featured in the American Wings Wolf North Gallery in the upcoming exhibition Water Memories, which opened on June 23rd. The exhibition presents intimate connections with and memories of water and explores diverse aesthetic expressions of one of our most prevalent and most potent natural resources. Water Memories flows as a current of stories and moments that contemplate the impact of water's presence and absence upon our daily lives. One new acquisition featured in Water Memories is by Chemehuevi artist Cara Romero, her 2015 archival photograph, Water Memory, which is the signature image for this exhibition and is a promised gift from a private collection. In an online interview, the artist stated, "I wanted the male and female represented in the photograph to be historically affected by the element of water in the literal sense, so that it would further empower the spiritual connection that natives have with water. Here we have a male and female Pueblo corn dancer captured in both a terrifying and peaceful free fall into a mysterious deluge of natural water. So while it's disastrous, it's also very peaceful. It's part of the life cycle. Water is cleansing and there's spirituality of it, but it's also very frightening, like they've just been swept off the corn dance line." And one of the things that was interesting to learn in conversations with Cara was that she trained herself in both underwater photography as well as scuba diving in order to create this image. And she talked to me about how she trained herself with underwater photography in her bathtub in her home. Related to Cara's image of the 2 Pueblo dancers being swept away, Cara's community, the Chemehuevi, also experienced being swept away. Over 8,000 acres of Chemehuevi homelands were swept away in the late 1930s and 40s by the construction of a dam on their homelands. And so Cara's work relates to the first work that is exhibited in Water Memories, this jacket, which was created by Rick St. Germain of the Le Coudray Reservation in Wisconsin. And so the story of this jacket is that Rick St. Germain spent time on Alcatraz Island in the early 1970s when he was 19 years old. So at Alcatraz Island, he spent a summer and was heavily influenced by the activism that he witnessed there. And he brought that sense of activism home to the Le Coudray Reservation in Wisconsin, where at that time, a 99-year lease on the Winter Dam was about to be renewed. The dam had been built at a much earlier time and had flooded the original cemetery and village of the Le Coudray people. It had also been impacting their ricing beds as well as their where they were fishing and impacting the local marine life, so it was affecting their food sources. Rick was 19 years old, decided he was going to hold a demonstration and occupy the dam. He started this entire protest himself, and then AIM members joined him, and there was an occupation of the dam. In order to give Rick strength and power for his activism, his mother Saxon helped him to embellish this jacket, this jean jacket that had been hanging in her closet for several years. So she helped Rick do the beadwork along the edging of the jacket, which are tiny little blue and white beads that represent water. And then also to sew this Thunderbird patch made out of red felt from a local dime store onto the jacket. Rick explained to me in our conversation about the jacket that the Thunderbird is a sacred image to his community, the Lakudere, and to the Medewan practice, and that it's often on drums, but it's also on painted on rocks and other natural environments, and that for him it represents power and water, thunderstorm approaching, but also the renewal of power for the people. And so his mother helped him sew this jacket, and this became the symbol of the Winter Dam occupation. So the story behind about the jacket is that this jacket had been sitting in his mother Saxon's closet for several years. It belonged to his older brother. His brother had ignored the jacket for quite some time, but once they sewed the beadwork and the red Thunderbird, his brother wanted the jacket back. And so for many years, Rick and his brother had an ongoing debate about who the jacket actually belonged to. And I'm just excited that it now belongs to the people, in a sense, to the communities, in a sense, who now can be in its presence. I love this juxtaposition between this jacket, activist clothing, and this 18th century neoclassical gallery. I just think it's incredibly striking, and I love the intergenerational conversation between this water protector wear and these mirror shields, which represent a new generation of water protectors. And so one of my goals with having these works in conversation with one another was to represent that intergenerational, that ongoing spirit of protection, of activism, and also with the hopes that younger generations remember that there are many generations before who have been fighting this fight, and I hope that that helps to give them strength in their current activism. Our second acquisition in Water Memories is by the renowned Ho-Chunk artist Truman Lowe. This elegant 1993 sculpture, feather canoe made of willow, copper, and feathers, portrays water as a place of sanctuary, emergence, and regeneration. In his 2004 biography, Woodland Reflections, written by art historian Joe Ortel, the artist stated that he wanted to create a canoe that could fly on water in order to recreate the feeling that he had as a child while floating along the rivers in Wisconsin with his father. The result is a lightweight, minimalist vessel that speaks to connections between water and sky. Both of our new acquisitions embody urgent environmental challenges currently faced by numerous Indigenous communities to protect shrinking homelands and freshwater sources. The quiet potency of both artworks intentionally draw in viewers to pause, to look closely, and to reflect upon contextual, cultural, and personal meanings of water. I wanted to share this image with you. It's the installation process of the canoe. Because of its fragility, its natural materials, all of these things, its sensitivity to possible infestation, the canoe had to be enclosed within a plexi box. But because we wanted an ethereal feeling surrounding the canoe, rather than having it in with a bonnet and inside of a case or a vitrine, which I felt would give it an entombed feeling, a heavy feeling, I wanted for it to be hung closer to the ceiling with particular lighting that would shine through the canoe and then create patterns along the gallery floor. And when I was working with our design team, there were several words that I kept mentioning to them: ethereal, magical, floating, sparkly. I love anything sparkly. So these were all things reflective. All of these words I kept repeating over and over to them. And so it was really powerful experience to work with this team who were interpreting everything I was saying to them and then translating that, and then this was the result of our collaboration. And I also think that our texts often don't get enough credit for the incredible work that they do in museums everywhere. And so I just want to say that that I just appreciate the hard work that our technicians actually do to help manifest our imaginations. In the exhibition, Lowe's feather canoe is placed in dialogue with 19th century cyanotypes of the German-American photographer Henry Bosse. Between 1883 and 1893, Bosse was hired by the U.S. Army Conservation Corps of Engineers to create images of the Mississippi River between Minnesota and St. Louis. For a project intended on remaking the upper Mississippi River, the artist was thinking aesthetically rather than just mapping the river. The result was over 300 liquidy blue oval-shaped images of the river, its surrounding lands, which represent the ancestral homelands and waters of the Ho-Chunk and Dakota peoples. And I want to say about this that Bosse did not realize what he was doing when he was creating over 300 images of the upper Mississippi River. He documented all of the landscape, the hills, the surrounding bluffs, the small towns, everything he could document. And what he just did not think about that these were the homelands of the Ho-Chunk people who had been removed from this region 13 times and many times at gunpoint. And they just kept coming back. They could not leave their homelands. And so I wanted to have this dialogue between the canoe and the cyanotypes to demonstrate that connection to the homelands and to the waters of the Ho-Chunk people. The cyanotype suite is actually very light sensitive, and so this is the first installation, and we will rotate this in November and have 4 new cyanotypes. But I just love this connection. I also love the cyanotype format, the blue quality. If you've ever worked with cyanotype, you know that you splash the liquid onto the surface and then you expose it to the light and the plate, and then you get this image, in the resulting image. But also, cyanotypes are imperfect. They have drips and splashes and all of these other qualities that speak to the medium, but also speak to the liquid that you're engaged with in the process. And it was perfect for the exhibition. And of course, the color blue is resonant throughout the entire show. I wanted to mention something else really quickly, and that is when I first learned that we had to encase the canoe in a plexi box, I was really uneasy about it. I wanted the canoe to feel as if it was flying, but as I mentioned, for all the reasons it had to be in this box, there were a number of unexpected and delightful moments that happened during the installation. And if you ever come to the show, what you will see is the box ended up acting like a multi-sided mirror. And because of its reflective surface, you get different views of the canoe. So you can see it, the top of the box, you're looking down into the canoe. On either side, you're getting another angle of the canoe. So it was just this really incredible material moment, an unexpected moment that happened during the installation that also spoke to the idea of reflection, the idea of memory, the idea of repetition that is part of the exhibition. And these are some of our Ho-Chunk materials that are in our co-collection at the museum. And I want to mention that although the Diker collection gets all of the attention at the Met, we actually have other Native American collections. So we have the Coe collection, we have the Rockefeller collection, which arrived in the 1970s, Coe, which arrived in 2011, and also the Cosby Brown musical instrument collection. And so we're currently in dialogue with a number of source communities about repatriation issues, cultural sensitivity issues, and then the appropriate presentation of all of the items. So one of the first things that I did when I arrived in 2020 was that I organized a museum-wide inventory of every Native American item we have at the Met. This was a challenge because all of these collections are in different departments. And if you've ever been to the museum, you know how big the museum actually is. We had to do this in order to get organized and know what we had rather than working in this fragmented approach in regard to repatriation issues. And so now we're working with updating all of our collection summaries, sending those summaries out to all of the source communities, and then also providing copies to NAGPRA, which is part of the federal law that we all have to follow. And so it's actually been this really rewarding process being in dialogue with the source communities and understanding what should be on view, what shouldn't. All of these things has just been very eye-opening and just incredibly rewarding. Another highlight of the Water Memories exhibition is this trail marker tree series by Tom Jones, who is also Ho-Chunk. And so throughout the exhibition, what I should say is that it includes 41 works, both native and non-native artists. It's divided into 4 sections: ancestral connections, forests and streams, water and sky, and then oceanic imaginations. And I'll show you examples of that throughout the presentation. But Tom's work is included in the forests and streams section of the exhibition. And so there are a number of works in the show that are not direct references to water. And unless you know what they are, then you would understand the connection to water. And so I'm sure many of you here understand what trail marker trees are. They represent young saplings that were tied with either sinew or rope and then heavy rocks or something else that weighed the sapling down. The tree then grows up toward the sky, and so it creates this particular bend. The trees point to freshwater sources, so they're basically a living map within the environment. And that was one of the other reasons that I had that map that I talked about earlier in the presentation, that I had it removed because it did not represent an indigenous map. It did not represent an indigenous navigational source. And so this trail marker tree is a map or navigational source that points to freshwater source. Another highlight of the Water Memories exhibition is the 17-foot wide triptych created by the Wissenyo and German-American artist Fritz Scholder, most well known for his Indian portrait series from the mid-20th century. Possession on the Beach from 1989 is one of his few works that depicts water. The image also reflects a very challenging time in the artist's life. He was going through divorce at the time that he created, and he was also going through some very serious health issues. The inclusion of this work is the very first time that this renowned artist is being shown at the Met. So what I want to show is that the triptych was placed in dialogue with Courtney Leonard's Breach 2 Logbook 2, which talks about the over-harvesting of whales and how that impacted the Shinnecock community. It took 4 people 2 days to install Courtney's sculpture. The sculpture is created by numerous, over 60 of whale teeth that all have a different weight and have to be installed according to weight and size. And so she provided us with very specific directions. We sat on the platform base for the sculpture with all of these blankets. It was very Zen-like. It was almost like creating some type of a sand painting. It was very quiet. There were many of us. There were 4 of us. And then you can see there are other people in the background. There are about like all these people watching us do this. The only thing that is holding this sculpture in place is balance, weight, and a little bit of museum wax. So it was a little nerve-wracking. Each of the teeth are very fragile. They are very organically shaped. You're holding them and you're trying, to balance them on one another. So it's like this elaborate puzzle, and it's really quite stunning in the end. So this is the gallery space that we refer to as Oceanic Imaginations. Here is the dialogue between Courtney's sculpture and the Fritz Shoulder triptych. Again, the blue reference, like the cyanotypes, which is carried throughout the exhibition, and then placing Courtney's work in dialogue with William Merritt Chase and also Arthur Dove, who also depict Shinnecock homelands in their work as well. So it was really important to me to have an up-and-coming young woman who is also Indigenous and have her work with some major hitters in the American art world. I just think she has absolutely every right to be in the same gallery spaces as some of our, I guess, again, big hitters in the American art world, and why shouldn't she be? They all speak to one another. And again, unexpected, pleasant surprises throughout the exhibit, this wonderful sight line between the triptych and then also the William Merritt Chase, his ocean view here coming around. And then these are some installation views from the different sections of the exhibition. This is when you first come into the American Wing space, and this is the first work you encounter. This is part of the Ancestral Connections section of the show. And then you have the entrance, which includes the mirror shields, again, another reflective surface, so that when visitors come into the gallery, they encounter themselves and think about their role with environmental conflicts and also as water protectors. I'd also like to acknowledge that we invited local people and community members to be part of this project. There's someone here in the audience who helped to create this series of mirror shields. The original mirror shields project was created by Chinupa Hanska Luger for the Standing Rock protest. And so we wanted to continue in that spirit, and we invited community members to come to the Met to work together to create the shields, and then those shields are installed on the outside or the entryway of the gallery. Once these shields are deinstalled, they will be donated to active water protectors in Minnesota. And I just want to say this was a really fun time. Just a strong sense of community and a wonderful way to bring just community members into the project who are all acknowledged here as contributors and as artists to in the exhibition. And then here is another part of the Ancestral Connections section, Cara Merrill's work. So this is the end of the Ancestral Connections, from the jacket through the mirror shields, and then here, and then we also have some items here on this wall that you cannot see in this photograph. And then you walk in, and this whole side of the gallery is the Water and Sky section, and then Truman Lowe's work is the highlight of that section. And organizing in that way was an easier way for us to communicate to each other, the design team, also the techs. When we referred to it in those terms, people got it right away, rather than referring to each of the works by their catalog number or anything like that. Here are the two Tom Jones trail marker tree photos. This is one of his original trees. They're showing in different seasons. One we installed as a wallpaper treatment that is cradling these ho-chunk items. And I love also that this image is another depiction of water in another season, the snow. And then here's the original in a trail marker tree in the spring. And then it goes through to the oceanic imaginations. This is also part of the oceanic imaginations. These are whale oil lamps made out of cut glass, and these are part of the American Wings collection. I wanted to show how aesthetics often numb us to the darker history behind them. And so these whale oil lamps, many of which still have residue on the wicks, the actual wicks of the lamps, are just across from Courtney's whale tooth sculpture. And so we wanted to address that history of over-harvesting of whales in the exhibition. So our next project is Grounded in Clay, which we are working in partnership with the School for Advanced Research as well as the Vilcek Foundation. And this will be the first entirely community curated exhibition at the Met. So it's currently on view at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe, and then the next venue is the Met. So it is the first community curated Native American exhibition at the Met. 60 Pueblo community members curated 100 historically and culturally significant works. They also contributed to in-gallery labels and also the exhibition catalog. And then there's also an audio and guide that will have the full statements that each curator made about 2 ceramic works that they chose for the exhibition. It foregrounds voices and perspectives of over 60 community members from the 19 Rio Grande Pueblos and Iseta del Sur and also Hopi communities, and then staff members from the Met as well as SAR and then also the Vilcek. We all supported the community members throughout the process. These are 2 Cochiti polychrome storage jars that I wrote about that I selected and then wrote about for the exhibition. And I wanted to share about them with you. Created nearly a century apart, the visual dialogue between these 2 storage jars is compelling. Striking images on both jars are painted with hand-harvested, then ground and boiled bee plant, a natural pigment which blackens when fired and contrasts against a creamy white slip. On one jar, rain clouds, birds, and pollinating insects, specifically butterflies in a state of transformation, reference water and the sky. On the other, a seedling emerging out of the red earth is greeted by the light and warmth of the sun, just as swelling rain clouds hover above. Pictorially and materially, both pots embody life renewal and growth, gentle reminders of the beauty and fragility of the natural world on which we humans depend. Broad bands of slip in La Bajada red, soft cream, and other natural colors organize the jar compositionally and echo the stratified earth of the mesas, cliffs, and arroyos of the Rio Grande Valley. I like to imagine these 2 jars in someone's home, resting in the cool shade of a family kitchen that smells of delicious simmering foods. Their expertly scraped and smooth voluminous forms hold fresh, cool water or nourishing grains, a comforting presence that was likely part of a family's or community's daily life. My own community, the Purépecha, also create hand-coiled pottery with images of water, celestial bodies, and animals. The Purépecha are Pueblo people, a fishing community known for their swirling butterfly nets, which they use on Lake Pátzcuaro in the volcanic mountains of Michoacán. Once, when visiting my great-grandmother's pueblo outside Pátzcuaro, I bought a large clay jar painted with rows of fish, raindrops, and mountains. The woman who made the jar wrapped it in layers of Mexican newspaper, then carefully placed it inside a cardboard box. On the plane heading home, I flew over 2,000 miles carrying that clay pot in my arms. High above settler-imposed international borders, I held images of water, sky, and earth. In my role as Associate Curator of Native American Art, my ongoing efforts to foreground Indigenous voices reach beyond gallery spaces, and currently the museum has hosted virtual source community visits to our collections to help build positive collaborative relationships with sovereign nations and to discuss culturally sensitive and NAGPRA-relevant issues. Also ongoing are educational and public programs featuring Native American artists, scholars, and community experts that highlight current issues in Indian country. I'm also excited to share that our new Art of Native America audio guide, created in collaboration with the Met's digital team, includes voices of community members, artists, and Indigenous celebrities, and features the award-winning Cree and Métis actor of film and television, Tantu Cardinal, as narrator. I'm very proud to say that at the Met there has been much change and growth. I'm a strong believer that effective and long-lasting change takes time. My time at the Met began during the height of the COVID pandemic. My initial year was largely virtual, but it provided me the opportunity to assess the specific needs of the institution and to begin developing institution-wide guidelines for issues regarding NAGPRA, collections care, and exhibition protocol relevant to the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990. These important measures help my colleagues and I in our ongoing efforts to provide a welcoming collaborative space for Native American and Indigenous communities. Developing new policies and implementing culturally sensitive protocols at colonial and encyclopedic art institutions where these practices are very new can bring out many challenges, but they also encourage potential for new relationships, new beginnings, fresh perspectives, and collaborative partnerships. Indigenous art and creative practices have always offered diverse and innovative ways of knowing and understanding the world, unique expressions that are visually and materially realized in established aesthetic systems and community protocols. For many Native American and Indigenous communities, creative production and aesthetics are deeply rooted in the places and regions to which we belong and to all that is good about who we are as Indigenous peoples. This is one way we connect to our histories and to one another. The ongoing daily work with Native American art collections reminds us that these works carry the hopes and visions of our ancestors, but also that we must engage in ongoing dialogues, cross-cultural collaborations, and continual recentering of our self-determinations and creative practices. We must also question internalized settler colonial limitations, borders, and boundaries about who we are and how we want to move forward collectively. Thank you. I feel now there's like this bright light and I'm just like, here we go. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Gloria. I want to say thank you so much for having such a beautiful presentation. I feel as if I was in the exhibit. You speak about organizing this exhibit to create a welcoming and bright environment as opposed to how some other collections around different museums may show Native American exhibits in a more somber light. And I want to ask, how do you keep this in mind, like when creating this work? How do you ensure that like you're highlighting these types of emotions while creating these exhibits? And where did this like spur from? Do you try to like create like a united emotion when creating these exhibits, or was it something that you experienced while attending different museums?
Thank you for your question, Gloria. Thank you. I think it's very natural to experience emotions when you're looking at art from any culture, any background. I think that that's part of what art is about. It's a nonverbal connection that we make. And I think it's actually in many ways it can communicate much more than what we can verbally. And I'll just give you a quick story. So some people think it's odd that I'm an Indigenous person who loves museums, but there's a particular reason why, and that's grounded in my childhood, and that is when I was a child, my mother was always struggling with health issues, and so she couldn't attend a lot of events that, mothers who aren't struggling with those issues can. And I remember we were really excited. I grew up in Chicago, and we were taking a field trip from the suburbs into the city to the Chicago Art Institute, which played a really big role later on for me. And my mother was, for the first time, going to accompany as one of the chaperones, parental chaperones on a field trip. I'm sure you all have been through this, where your parent comes and you love it, and then it's like really awkward and all of this, right? And so I was very young, and we were on the bus, and we got to the museum, and as we arrived at the museum, my mother suddenly became very ill, and it was just too much for her. And instead of explaining to me what was happening, it was the 1970s, so instead they just kind of whisked her away. And I had no clue what was happening. I was young, very small, and was very frightened. And one of the teachers took me by the hand and then led me through the galleries. And just stepping in front of the paintings was a powerful moment. It calmed me, and it was just a very soothing experience for me. And I still see museums in that light. They're very soothing spaces. They're very beautiful spaces many times. I enjoy being surrounded by beauty, and I want for other Indigenous people and BIPOC communities to feel the same. I also think it's important to embrace that as BIPOC and Indigenous people, we can love more than Indigenous art or BIPOC art. We can love so much more, and we can engage in any type of art and curate any type of art. And I've often said in many of my presentations that I will not stop until we can, as Indigenous people, be represented in all areas of curatorial practice. There's no reason why we shouldn't be, and feel comfortable in all spaces in museums. And so that's really my practice.
Hi, I'm Robin. I just want to thank you for this extraordinary presentation. It was a beautiful presentation, but it also brought out the curatorial brilliance that you're bringing to the Met. And stunning to me the extent to which you were, through a very subtle handling of the spaces and the objects, bringing into the galleries so many things that are very difficult to bring in around the intergenerationality, around the land and the water. I'm a bit stunned in this moment, so I was wondering about how to articulate a question, but the first thing I wanted to say is just how impressed I am and how excited I am to go down and see what you're doing. So it's really thrilling. Because we just heard a wonderful anecdote about an early experience, I wonder if you could take us to a later experience in your professional formation that would give us perhaps some insight into the development of this capacity to bring those things into the gallery.
Thank you for your question. I don't know that I have any one particular experience that I could draw upon in this moment. I'm sure there are many. But what I really enjoy is when I hear community members felt something when they come into the exhibit. When, for instance, we have 2 Purépecha baskets on view, and the artist Sarah Sense recently came in. And I love the moment when a contemporary community member walks in and sees something from their community, and they suddenly stop, and they're like, and they greet the item, or they greet what's on view, and it makes them feel like they belong. It makes them feel like they're not alone. One experience that I had years ago was when I was working as director of the Darcy McNichol Center at the Newberry. We used to have this large, beautiful Cochiti drum that was in front of the entrance of the of the Indigenous Studies Center, and my former boss and colleague, Scott Manning Stebbins, who's Mohawk, he would greet the drum each day as he came into the office. And then when I stepped into his shoes, he was director, and then I stepped in as director, I would greet the drum. And he came back, so he had left and he is now at Syracuse, and he was gone for about a year, and he came back for a visit, and he was giving a lecture. And I intentionally asked that the drum be brought downstairs and be placed next to the podium where he was speaking. And when he arrived at the Newberry and he walked into the room to get situated, he saw the drum and he just lit up and he said, "Hi!" And I love those moments, those connections through the work. And in regard to the intergenerational, all of the elements that you were commenting on, for me, that's very natural to the work that's presented, because there is this ongoing aesthetic lineage that's embodied within the works. Even when there's something that's contemporary, there's always, at least in my experience, some reference to something historical. Either a work or an experience from the Indigenous artist community, or a tie to ancestral homelands, all of these things. And so it seems to flow naturally in that way. So I can't take all the credit for that, but thank you. I think the work is powerful and speaks to all of that, so thank you.
Hi, I'm interested, I was curious, I guess, about the term, the mirror shield. You probably explained, I might not have heard it, but I was fascinated by just those two words together. And I don't know if there's a symbol or a meaning behind that.
Yes, yeah. So those are created by Chinumpa Hansgaluger, and he was inspired by Ukrainian women activists who were standing up against armed police and were holding handheld mirrors in order to reflect back to the armed police their behavior, and in order to get them to become aware that they were engaged in violence against human beings. And so he drew upon that concept for the Standing Rock protest, and he wanted to create mirror shields that could protect the entire body of the water protectors. And so he came up with this concept of the cut masonite boards, and then they were covered with a reflective mylar surface. And so it's a really inexpensive, very quick and easy way to create a shield for the body, but also this reflective surface that was shining back to armed police what they were doing in that context with Standing Rock. But also when he created those shields for the water protectors at Standing Rock, he also engaged with, I guess, a more performative element. It's called River. I think it's called River Water Snake. And so he had a drone come in and document footage of the water protectors creating a spiral, a giant river or water snake, and then it's all documented, and it's incredible. And we have that video on view just inside the gallery space, so you have that context of the mirror shields activated.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This was so wonderful, and it's so good to know that all of us Indigenous people have such great representation in you and your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm curious about the conversations about repatriation of objects and how those are going. I don't know if they're confidential or if you can talk about that at all. But I'm curious about what the capacity of tribes is to take back those objects and care for them, and kind of what their desires are in terms of that stuff. And I'm also curious if the museum has a budget around back rent and how it relates to land back and all of those struggles.
Thank you for your question. Well, as part of the repatriation or NAGPR process, I think you know that every museum that is federally funded or receives any type of federal funds has to summarize and report to source communities all the materials that come from those communities. And then it's really up to each of the communities to decide what should be repatriated. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding that people think it's curators and museums who decide. It's not. We work in partnership with the community members. And although I cannot identify the communities who we're working with, we actually have a visit next week on the 24th and 25th, which I'm really excited about because it's a learning process for us as well. And it's a challenging process. I think everyone here knows about the updates that are happening right now to NAGPRA, but also that NAGPRA does not always function as smoothly as we would hope or in as timely a fashion for both communities and museums. It's actually a very convoluted process. It takes a number of years. It takes a lot of negotiating. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. And it can be quite challenging. It's time consuming, but we're very committed to it. And recently, I just finished writing a Native Arts initiative for the Met. It'll be the first Native Arts initiative ever. And it will include hiring 2 new positions, working with NAGPRA-related issues, but also in research capacity and curatorial practice. And so I'm excited because I'm just one person, and I cannot speak for all communities, and I also cannot even speak for my own community. And also, I think it's important that there's a team of people working on all of this, not just one person. So I'm happy with the way things are going. I wish that they were going more quickly. It's a long process. And when I hear things like give it all back or these kinds of strong statements, it's usually a signal to me that whoever is making those statements has not really worked in a museum for very long, or they've not worked in a museum full-time for very long. Maybe they've had an internship or some other experience. But once you've been in a museum full-time, you realize just how intricate the museum world is and just how complex it is. So everything takes a considerable amount of time and energy, but I think there's ways to focus that energy on doing what is right, and we will do what is right.
Gee, miigwech, Patricia, it's always nice to hear your talk. And thank you so much for all your work and your lovely selection of so many great Ojibwe objects. Miigwech. I think my question for you tonight would just be, I'd love to hear more about the decision within the land acknowledgement towards the entrance of the Dagger collection of the phrasing of ancestral and aesthetic items rather than the word art. I feel as throughout your talk, you kind of gesture towards the way that Indigenous works play with the boundaries of these departments within museums and all these other things. And I think I'd love to hear more about that decision. That I too think a lot about in my work, and I'd be really interested in hearing more about that. But thank you again.
So the decision to have the active land and water statement in the gallery space really drew upon what I was hearing from both individuals and community members in regard to land and water statements, and also, I should say land acknowledgements, that they were dissatisfied, that they felt superficial, and so that's why we have a land and water statement, which is different to me than a land acknowledgement. In my own presentations, in my own way, I always acknowledge that I'm a guest, even though I'm an Indigenous woman, and that is wherever I am, because my ancestors come from so far away. It's important to me to show my respect and acknowledge that I'm a guest. But in regard to this statement, my supervisor, Sylvia Yount, she says, it's your manifesto. And it really is in many ways, because it clearly states how we will move forward from the moment that it was installed onward. And that means that we will work with Indigenous communities on everything that we do. And because of that, there's an understanding that there's a lot of listening that's going on. So part of that statement says respectful listening. And I think that's a huge part of working with Indigenous communities. Stepping back, not being always presenting oneself as the expert, because you're not. It's impossible for any one museum professional or curator to be an expert on all 574 communities, languages, protocols, all of that. It's impossible. So I'm always wary of people who present themselves in that way. And I think listening is a huge part of it. But also, I mentioned that the statement replaced that very stagnant map that was there. And so part of that decision was in relation to that map, which I felt really divided the communities visually. It kind of boxed everyone into very specific regions. And I think we know as Indigenous peoples that that's just not the case. That's not how it's been. And so that's part of my ongoing effort to break through those settler-imposed borders and boundaries. It's just, that part I would say is personal, and it's important to me and to my practice. And I'm happy to talk about that further.
Chimigwech, thank you. What a beautiful, beautiful presentation. I think it struck me in more ways than I can articulate, but one of the things, I'm a psychologist, and I work with story medicine, and sort of the heart of it for me is sort of this interrelationship that we have. And when I was looking at your work and how you put these pieces together, that interrelationships of the pieces just create such a powerful impact. And the way that you're working with those spaces within those institutions is really, it makes me feel, it makes me feel good, but hopeful and excited, and it's so important. And I love the, with the dresses, the older, the grandmother, and then the newer one, and the support that provides. Really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Hi, I'm Bill. I'm currently working on a project for Indigenous language preservation and revitalization through children's bilingual storybooks. And I have a two-part question. I would really like to have hear your perspective on it. One is, when I took my 7-year-old daughter to the Met when she was in 2nd grade, she was really looking forward to it. But when she got there, she got really afraid of the objects because they represented the past, and especially in the Egyptian wing, they represented people and objects that are dead. I'm curious how we could make exhibitions like this, which has so much opportunity for learning, more approachable, accessible to the younger audience. And the second question is, I'm wondering how an exhibit like this can be also utilized to feature languages as a cultural artifact, but not a static object, but more as a living, evolving aspect of the heritage.
Thank you. Well, first I want to say thank you for your question, and I'm sorry that your daughter had that experience in the Egyptian wing. That's a powerful wing in the museum, and there's a lot of presence there, a lot of energy, and so I'm not surprised. I would say a number of our Indigenous community members who come to the museum tend to steer away from that space for a number of reasons. And I'm not, I don't curate that space, so I can't really speak too much about that. But we did have children in mind in the Water Memories exhibit, and although I did not show a slide, there is one section of the exhibit that is near Truman Lowe's flying canoe, and there's a case with model and children's canoes that were carved by different community members, and we invited an elder, a Tlingit elder, to write the label and tell the story about one of the canoes. And it was really beautiful because his label talked about when we would all jump in the car on a Sunday with no real agenda and just go see what we could learn today. And so the label for those model and children's canoes, one of the canoes is at the bottom, and it's an Ojibwe artist who created it. And they're all the different, I guess, accoutrement or, I don't know, items that are connected to the canoe. So there's a tiny little spear, and there's oars, and then there's a little stone fish. And we made sure to include those and arrange those, and then also have the fish in the canoe, so that, and we installed that particular work at the level where if a small child was visiting the exhibit, they could look inside and see the fish inside the canoe. So we did not forget children. Another thing that we've been doing is creating programming around water memories. So our November 4th program, which will focus on, as I mentioned, sound and healing, but also include a jingle dress celebratory dance that honors all of the artists who are part of the Water Memories and Art of Native America exhibit. That dance will have both children as well as adult dancers. And so children are welcome to all of our Native American programming. And that's part of the community. Children are welcome. And so that's part of my practice, is to include children and think about how they will see things and how they will experience. We also, I should mention that both Brenda Child and Robbie Robertson have written children's books that talk about their experiences. Brenda writes about jingle dresses, and Robbie writes about sound and his community. And there are a number of Native scholars now who are expanding outside of their traditional scholarship to write children's books, and many of them are quite beautiful. And so we've been bringing those into our bookstore at the museum. So those are some ways. And then your other question was in regard to language. I would say that that's actually my next goal. But when you have an exhibit that represents materially over 50 communities, it can get a little tricky about which languages are included, and then also, do you do it by item way, or how do you go about all of these things so that people don't feel left out? And I would say that's one of my biggest concerns, is that someone will be hurt because they're left out, and I do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. As an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous woman, I know what that feels like, and that's something that I do not want to repeat.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Patricia, so very much.